God's dream. Holy Spirit, help us dream of a world where there is justice and where everyone is free to build and grow and love and to simply have enough.
Well, good morning and happy Easter to you all. I'm Reverend Rich, pastor here at First United Methodist Church of Bellevue. We are launching into a new worship series called Faces of Our Faith. It is a really cool worship series in which we talk about some of the bold and untold stories of folks in the Bible, folks like Shriprah and Puah, who we're talking about today, who are some Hebrew midwives, Deborah, Queen Vashti, Jonah and Anna and Lydia and Eutychus and Philemon. We're going to try to put this study journal on the website for you to download if you don't pick one up in church. So we'll do our best. And I'm excited to do this series because it gives us a chance not only to hear some of the biblical narratives from people we don't often hear from, but it invites us to see that our role, our lives are Bible worthy. And we sometimes don't think that. We think like folks in the Bible are all main characters and we're just, we read them, but we don't see that our faith stories are important. But I think sometimes when we attend to the smaller stories, we recognize that my own faith life could be a part of this. And I've often said that one of the things we need to do is take the back cover off the Bible, because God's work in the world is not done and did not end in some ways with Jesus and the church, that it's ongoing and that there's stories that belong in the Bible. So today we're going to hear a really cool story from first chapter of Exodus, and we're going to hear it from the Message, and I'm going to read it for you. I don't do this often, but it's an important enough story that I want you to hear it. Okay? So a new king came to power in Egypt who didn't know Joseph. This is not Joseph, Jesus' father. This is Joseph, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, coat of many colors, Joseph. And this new Pharaoh, this new king, spoke to his people in alarm. There are way too many of these Israelites for us to handle. We've got to do something. Let's devise a plan to contain them, lest if there is a war, they should join our enemies, or they might just walk out and leave us. So he's concerned about losing his free labor. So they organized the Israelites into work gangs and put them to hard labor. And they built the storage cities of Pithom and Ramses for Pharaoh. But the harder the Egyptians worked them, the more children the Israelites had. The Egyptians got so they couldn't stand the Israelites and treated them worse than ever, crushing them under heavy labor. They made them miserable with work, making bricks and mortar and backbreaking work in the fields. They piled on the work, crushing them under the cruel workload. The king of Egypt had a talk with two Hebrew midwives. One was named Shriprah and the other was Puah. And he said, whenever you deliver the babies of the Hebrew women, look at the gender of the baby, and if it's a boy, I want you to kill it, but if it's a girl, let her live. But the midwives had far too much respect for God and didn't do what the king of Egypt ordered. They let the boy babies live. The king of Egypt called in the midwives and said, why didn't you obey my orders? You've let those babies live. But the midwives answered Pharaoh, the Hebrew women aren't like the Egyptian women. They're vigorous. Before we can even get there, they've already had the baby and are back at work. God was pleased with the midwives. The people continued to increase in number, a very strong people. And because the midwives honored God, God gave them families of their own. Cool story, right? And it's one that you may not have ever heard before. So there's a lot to this story, and we could spend weeks talking about it. But there's one point in particular that I think is important, and that is the resistance of the two Hebrew midwives. They are resisting the death-dealing, the death-commanding powers of empire, right? Pharaoh tells them to be a part and party to something that's awful, and they resist it. They push back against it, and they do so in a clever way, kind of a dishonest way, but they do it in their own context and in their own way. And I think this is really instructional because it's easy for us to feel pretty powerless against the big forces in the world. That there's a lot out there economically and politically and socially that is a lot like Pharaoh, right? That it's a lot like empire, where it crushes the little ones, it exploits the less powerful. And as people of faith, we're called to resist that, right? We're called to resist in our baptismal covenant, to resist evil in whatever forms they present themselves. But it can be hard because we feel so small and we feel powerless. And this story today reminds us that in love and in faith, there is no small act, because we don't quite know what the results of our actions will be. Now, if we were to turn the next page in the Bible, we get to the story of Moses, right? So this is the time of Moses, and this would be Moses living, being alive, because the midwives didn't kill him. And so super interesting and important, and reminds us to do what we can where we're at with what we can. Recently there were two House of representatives from the State House in Tennessee, who were expelled because they were protesting gun violence and the lack of gun control in Tennessee and in the United States. And they were expelled from that body of legislature just days after some small children had been killed in Tennessee by gun violence. And number one, it's absurd that they were expelled. And any good Christian knows that we need better gun control. We need to stop worshiping at the altar of Smith & Wesson, which we obviously do. It's just not even a question. And if you don't like hearing that, tough, you need to hear it. Somebody needs to speak the truth. And so these people were expelled for resisting, and they have been let back in, reinstated into this House of Representatives. But I think their resistance, their protest, is akin to the spirit of Shriprah and Puah, that they did what they could with where they were at and who they were. Most of us don't have great power or great wealth. Like, it's very difficult for us to change the world, even though we would like to make it more gracious and peaceful. But today's narrative, today's sacred story, tells us to do what we can with what we are, and do our best and trust that God can do great things with small things, right? Even small acts can have huge consequences that we just don't know. And so we act in faith, we act with integrity, and trust and hope that that God can do something with that. Now, biblical scholars have said that the book of Exodus, in large, is the Israelites' answer to the question, who are you? That in the book of Exodus is the story of the Israelites. It's the story of being captive. It's the story of being freed. And it's the story of a people who resist empire. And as Judeo-Christians, as people who live into the tradition of the Old Testament, and as people who follow Jesus, that is part of who we are as well, because that's part of what Jesus did. Is Jesus resisted the death-dealing forces of empire. It's part of what got him crucified. And it's part of our call as well, in whatever ways we can, right? And that's the promise of this text, is that we do our best with who we are, with where we are, and what we have, to be faithful and to choose life and to value life, and trust that God will work with that and do great things. And so we'll leave it there today. Thanks for joining in. I hope you all had a blessed Easter. I hope the sun is shining on you. It's not here in Washington quite yet, but soon. Flowers are blooming. We just need some sunshine to go with it. And be gentle to yourselves. Be gentle to others. Do good work. Make sure you laugh and have some joy in each day. And shalom to you, dear friends. Amen.
God's dream. Holy Spirit, help us dream of a world where there is justice and where every